Yeah, my name's Richard. I'm a developer evangelist for Here Technologies. This is what I look like, in case you're interested. And let's remove that and in fact move to something interesting instead. So this webinar is going to be about an overview of our APIs and SDKs. So I don't have any slides. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to go directly to the developer portal of Here Technologies. Now, I'm not entirely sure how familiar you are with Here Technologies, but we're a location services company. We are making maps, we collect map data, and then we make that data available to you through our APIs. So you can build cool stuff with that data and with the services we've built on top of that data. We've been doing this for a very, very long time. In fact, the company's been around since 1985. Back in the day, we built the very first digital map of California for a really, really cool and weird type of early navigation system. And I'm going to have to very quickly see if I can pull this up. Going to open up my PowerPoint, and even though I promised no slides, this isn't really a slide, this is just a picture. So this is Driver Guide, and this was an early navigation system from the 80s. And this was literally a machine that people could buy and place at a gas station or at a car rental station. And then people could, using those wonderfully 80s button, could input their current location, or actually the current location of the device was hard-coded in the device, but they could say where they wanted to go in the San Francisco Bay Area. And then at the bottom right here, you can see that the machine would literally print out instructions for you to drive. We've come a long way since then, obviously, so have routing and navigation systems. Today, we're building high definition maps for autonomous driving. We have this fleet of 400 LiDAR and HD camera equipped cars that are driving around the world, collecting terabytes and terabytes and terabytes of data every week as one of the many sources for our very high quality map data. Now, for developers, your one-stop shop really is this page, developer.here.com. This is our developer portal. There's also a corporate page at here.com, but if you're a developer, developer.here.com really is your starting point. And usually when I look into someone's APIs, I tend to go straight to the documentation. I think that's what we're going to do today as well. But we're going to start with this button here, get started for free, or the sign up button. The nice thing is that we offer what we call a freemium plan. So if you click on sign up, and it requires your name, your email, password, country, a security check, and then on the next page, you need to agree to terms and services. And that's all you need to do to register. When you do that, you get a freemium account. And through that freemium account, we give you 250,000 API transactions for free every month. You don't have to put in a credit card. There's no hoops to jump through, and you get a new, fresh 250,000 API transactions every month. There's some additional things you get here. For example, data storage. If you attended a Ray's webinar on Here Studio, you probably talked a little bit about Data Hub, which is location data storage, and you get some stores. So you get some additional stuff as part of the freemium plan as well. But the most important thing really is the free transactions. Now, 250,000 is quite a bit. That should probably get you through the hackathon just nicely. But if you build something at the hackathon, for example, where you feel like, hey, this is actually my new startup idea, or this is a great free public service I want to offer to people, that's cool too. So the 250,000 transactions are not just for evaluation purposes or hackathon purposes. If you have a business that requires less than 250,000 transactions every month, we're totally cool with that. You can completely run that on those free transactions. And then, once you go beyond that, it starts at $1 for 1,000 transactions, but we also have other plans, pro plans and so on. So if you have a higher transaction need and buy some transactions in advance, it can get significantly cheaper than that. Now, I've already got in fact, if you click up here, there's a data hub plan for additional data storage and a pro plan where you buy 1 million transactions in advance. And then you see, even with that pro plan, it already drops to under 45 cents per 1,000 transactions. Now, I have a developer account already, so I don't need to sign up, but this is really if you want to use the APIs and you want to experiment with them and you want to use them in the hackathon, signing up here is your first stop. And we'll see very soon as to how you get your credentials. Let me log in with my testing account. And that will take you to my projects page. And this is in fact where you will land as soon as you've signed up. So once you've reviewed those terms and services and clicked on accept, you will end up on this project page. Now my project page has a lot of different projects. Some of them go back a long time because I've worked with the company for a while. You will really just have one freemium plan account in here. And you can go down here if you want additional plans and so on, but really what you want to do is you want to click on your, let's pick this one, on your freemium plan, and this takes you to your credentials page. So you can see here we have different types of credentials. There's a set of credentials for our JavaScript web API. There's a set of credentials for our REST APIs. There are sets of credentials for our various SDKs. And you can see usually you have to click a button that says generate credentials depending on what you're doing. In my case, I've already generated a set of credentials. I think we'll mostly be looking at the REST APIs, and this is a great place to start. So go to the REST APIs, click create API key. As you can see, I've already created one here. There's two types of authentication, OAuth 2, which is a little more complicated and great for production, but for testing and evaluation and hackathon purposes, a simple API key is a great choice. And you can copy that here. You can click on view. I'm not going to do that so it doesn't get exposed. But if it does get exposed, you can always delete this again, create a new one. You can create two keys and you can rotate them around. So if you want to play along with this a little bit, with things I'm going to be doing, your best bet is to sign up on the portal, go into your freemium account and create maybe an API key for our REST APIs. We'll also probably be looking a little bit at JavaScript and maybe at one of the mobile SDKs depending on time. So if you want to, you can do that as well. Okay, we've signed up, we've got our credentials. Let's go to documentation. And this really is the overview page that shows you what APIs and services we have to offer. If I mouse over this, you can see this grouped into several areas. One is maps. We're a mapping and location services company, so obviously we have APIs that allow you to use our maps. Then we have geocoding and search. Geocoding is essentially, if you're not from the geo or mapping industry, geocoding is a term for translating addresses. And specifically what this means is that geocoding will take street addresses, like your home address, like you're used to, like you would write on a letter or a package, and latitudes and longitudes, so geo coordinates, and convert them into each other. So you can take a geocoder and you can take an address and it'll tell you, hey, this is at this particular latitude and longitude, and the other way around. And then of course you can also search for places of interest. So if you want to know where's the nearest gas station, the nearest hospital, which Thai restaurants around me are still open, those kind of questions is what the search part of this geocoding and search API answers. Then we have a section called routing. This really is around any kind of mobility. So you're probably thinking of a navigation system in a car, and you'd be right about that, but there are also many, many other things here, including public transit and multimodal routing and so on, and we'll look at this. Then we have a section called fleet telematics, And this really is about fleet management and logistics. So if you're thinking about delivery use cases, if you're thinking about somebody having 20 packages to deliver and wanting to know what is the best order in which to deliver them, and then having to deliver them in a really big truck, and then wanting to know what is a route I can take with this big truck that I can actually drive, that doesn't have corners that are too tight for me or bridges that are too low for me. Those are the kind of things you'll find in the fleet telematics section. Geo-enrichment is a fairly specific thing. I'm not sure we'll have time to talk about that, maybe a little bit at the end, so you'll get a complete overview, kind of similar for LiveSense SDK. More interesting are the Here SDKs, which really is the Here SDK, which for multiple platforms, Android, iOS, and Flutter, gives you access to all of these APIs. And those are really the core things we want to talk about. So maybe let's start with, actually let us not start with maps, because that is a good use case later for looking into the web JavaScript SDK and the Android SDKs. Let's maybe start with geocoding and search. So for all of our APIs, you see we got these little boxes here and a little name and a little description. And then down here, you basically have JavaScript, REST, Here SDK for Android, Here SDK for iOS. The Flutter SDK is still in beta, so it hasn't been added here yet. And you can then click on that, and immediately you will be taken to the relevant documentation for this. And you can see we've just introduced a new version of the geocoding and search API, so there's some of the older versions of this are still on here for people who are still using them. They're marked as in maintenance, but we'll look at this. And usually what you'll find in our documentation are usually a lot of things up here. This is a new SDK, so some of the examples aren't quite here yet. But usually you'll find a guide, you'll find an API reference, you'll find examples, and some other things as well. There's two ways to really get started with APIs. Either you can start reading about it a little bit. So we have our guide here, which gives you information on how to construct requests. There's appendix information here, like excuse me, our places category system, which we might be looking at in a minute. More detailed information about the endpoints, but I tend to jump right into the API reference in most cases. And you see we've got authentication information and then several endpoints. And I think we'll look at a quick geocode and maybe a quick places and point of interest search to give you an idea of how this API works. A great tool you'll have your own tools, but a tool I like to use for playing with REST APIs is Postman, because that really gives you a nice way to format API calls and test them and experiment with them and see, exactly what kind of header was sent, and the response immediately gets formatted properly. So, and let me quickly gather my thoughts. Where was I? Oh yeah, right. So we wanted to do a geocode. You can see in this geocoding and search API, we have multiple endpoints. So geocode, this endpoint processes text input, matching it to a map data index and returning a set of addresses. So this really does what I told you about earlier. You take a street address, and then this API will look into our map database and tell you which geographic coordinate this address is at. There's also the reverse, which is cleverly called reverse geocode, where if you put into a set of geo coordinates, it'll actually return you the address of those geo coordinates. So if you, for example, have a latitude and longitude from your say on your Android phone, you want to display to the user the address that they're at, then you can use the reverse geocode. On the other hand, if the user has entered a street address, maybe that they want to go to in a ride-sharing application, for example, then you can use geocode to find out where that actually is. And if you look at this documentation here, we've got the API endpoint at the top right, and then we have a list of query parameters that are all here and described. And then down here, you can click on the response box, and you'll get a nicely formatted way of looking at the response. So let's just fire up a simple geocode request through Postman. And this is where you will need your API key, because for authentication purposes, the first parameter you will always need for all of our APIs is the API key. I've set it up here in Postman so that I've just got it as a variable, because copying, pasting, and typing it is tedious. This will be your API key. And then this is a really simple API call, because all you need is the Q parameter for query, and you can type something into this. So in this case, it's 200 Central Park West, New York. So again, imagine you're in New York, you have some sort of ride-hailing application, and it asks you, where do you want to go? And you start typing a text, and this is what you type, and you hit enter. How do you actually find out where that is? We're going to send this off now, and we get a JSON response back, and you can see there is a list of items, gives us multiple responses, which means that the thing we've put in is maybe not specific enough to map exactly to one value. Though we'll see the first response is actually pretty good, is probably what we wanted. It is 200 Central Park West, New York. And one of the nice things you see is there's a lot of additional information, right? This is really what we want. We want the position, the latitude and longitude of that location, of that street with that house number. But you get additional information too. First of all, you get the address in a nicely structured format. So if, for example, the user has put something in and you want to display that back to him, you can do this in a much nicer way, where you know exactly, you get a label for the whole address, but you also get all of that information broken down into categories. You also know that this result type is house number, which means that the precision is down to the actual house number. For example, if we leave out the 200, the house number, it'll actually say result type street, because that's the biggest precision he can get without you giving him a house number. So it'll give you the middle of that street. Other information is access. For example, you get the access point. So this would be, this in this case is very similar, but if, for example, you're later searching for, let's say, a museum or something, this would actually give you the entrance. And there's a lot of other information. I don't want to get too deeply into this, because Ray will talk about this API in detail later on, but I wanted to look a little closer at the first one that we're looking at to give you an idea of how this works and to give you an idea of the kind of detailed information you get back from our APIs. Let's fire up some quick other calls in this section. So in this case, I will be using the browse endpoint to look for points of interest in a certain category at a certain place. So we've got an at, which is the latitude and longitude. We've got categories, which in this case is museums. And for this kind of information, you would go back here to the guide, and you can go to the places category system, and you get all the information here. In this case, we would be looking for museums at this particular location, and you can see you get a lot of different, again, a list of, I don't know what the Demena Children's History Museum is, but this, I think the location is in New York. So AMNA is just the American Museum of Natural History. And in fact, you get multiple entries for this, because the museum really has multiple museums in it. And then you can also do something like auto suggest. So remember, again, imagine you have some sort of ride-hailing application and you start typing. What you usually get is after you've typed in a couple of letters, it starts giving you suggestions for addresses or for places, so you don't have to type the whole thing. So if you start, for example, let's say you wanted to go to that American Museum of Natural History, you would start typing American Muse, and then you would expect the app to give you suggestions. And this is what the auto suggest API does. It'll actually give you a list of results that match that particular substring that you've typed in. And you can call this multiple times. You know, once the user has put in 3 additional characters, you can call it again and get more and more precise results. And you know this too, as you type, this list tends to update, and this is how you do that. So this is a quick overview of search and geocoding, which is really all about finding and searching for and converting addresses and places points of interest in various ways. So this is a really huge and useful database for all kinds of information, as you can imagine. So next, let's look at the routing section, which I really like to think of more of the mobility section. So you'll see here we have a routing API, and we'll look at this. We also have a transit API, which is about public transit information. So this API can give you routes with public transit. So you want to basically say I want to go from A to B, and I want to use the public transit instead of the car or the bike or something. And it'll give you that. Depending on the city, it'll even give you that with live public transit information, so it'll know that the train is late and all this kind of stuff. It'll also give you information about where is the next public transit station. So where is the next subway station? Where is the entrance to the station? Which lines depart at that station, and so on. We'll quickly look at that. Intermodal routing is an API where you actually combine multiple modes of routing. So think about something where you want to do something like park and ride, where you take your car, but you don't drive it to your destination, but you drive it to a convenient public transit station with a parking lot, and then switch over into public transit. And you can define multiple strategies for these, and there's some other modes in there as well. Then we have a traffic API. That I will actually just show you on maps.here.com. Let's go to Berlin. The traffic API basically gives you two things. It gives you, we click on traffic here, it gives you traffic flow information. So if we zoom in here, we can see that on the Autobahn here in Berlin, there's clearly morning traffic. People are going to work. So it's not so bad because fewer people are going into the city in the morning at the moment, but there is a big traffic jam here. So this is traffic flow. So for any given road, it'll be able to tell you how the traffic flow is there: green, good, red, bad. And then it gives you traffic incidents, and that actually tells you why the traffic is bad there. So here you can actually see, oh, there's roadworks. It's probably not so much morning traffic that causes the slow moving traffic, the traffic jam here. It's that there's construction work. And you can even see the API will give you information like, when is the construction expected to end? So 3 days from now, this will probably look a little bit better. You can even see there's a part of the road is closed here, which is why it's marked in black. So those are the two pieces of information you can get out of the traffic API. But we'll look at the routing API for now. Again, there's a developer guide, and that has kind of use cases, but even some concepts where it will give you some charts of how to properly interpret the response at the end. But again, I tend to dive right into the API reference, and you'll see there's actually just really one important API endpoint, which is routes. And the required parameters here are a transport mode. So you'll see these, an origin, and a destination. So if we go into an example for routing, we'll see this here. Up here, we have our API endpoint. We have our API key, our credentials. We put in an origin, which is where we start as a latitude and longitude, and a destination, which is where we want to go. You can also put in, using the via parameter, additional points. So you want to say, I want to go through, I want to have additional waypoints that I want to go through. You can do this. And then you set a transport mode. In this case, let's say we want to drive by car. Other options are available. For example, walking. It can also do public transit and so on. And then you have to tell it what information you actually want about the route. There's so much information the API can give you about the route. You literally have to tell it which information you want. In this case, we're asking for actions, instructions, and polyline. We'll look at this. I'll just fire this off, and you'll get a list of routes. In this case, there's only one because we only asked for one. And then you'll see you get a list of sections here. Again, because we only have 2 waypoints, there's only one section. And in that section, you're getting information about it. This section is driven by vehicle, which makes sense. We want to do the whole thing by car. And you literally get all of the instructions you need to follow this route, including text instructions, which is what we asked for. And it says, you know, head southeast on Fulton Square, go for 71 meters, and so on and so on. And then eventually you'll arrive at your destination is on your left. You'll get additional information. There's an encoded polyline here, so you can display this on a map if you want to. So there are all kinds of options around here. I want to have a quick look. There's a lot more information you can get out of here. There's multiple transit modes. There's a lot to discover, but again, we'll do this later in another webinar in the week. I will just quickly go and show you the next transit departures API. So this is a part of the transit API. And what this endpoint does, the departures endpoint, is essentially saying, hey, I'm in this place, which public transit departs soon? So this will actually tell you where you are. I think this is in Bangkok or something, and I'll actually say, okay, so the next departures are the subway, the MRT Blue Line, and it'll depart at this particular time. It'll even give you information like the head sign on the subway. So if you were to look at the front of the subway and see the sign at the top, if it says this, then you know that you're heading in the right direction. So this would probably not help me that much. It'll also give you things like colors, so you can properly, like in the colors of that particular train line, so this would be blue, I suppose, information, you know, about the transit website and all these kind of things. So you get a list of all these subways departing at that particular station, and so on and so on. So there's a really huge amount of information you can get out of this, and a huge list of options around any kind of mobility use cases that our APIs offer. This just scratches the surface, but this is an overview API, an overview webinar. Let's maybe go to maps now. So the easiest way to do maps, if we go back to the documentation and go into the map section, you see there's a whole host of options really. In most cases, what you want is one of the interactive maps APIs, which is the JavaScript web SDK that allows you to display nice interactive maps on the web. There is the Android, iOS, the Flutter one is actually here, we've already added it. And there are others as well. I won't go into vector tiles and map tiles and those kind of things. I will quickly show you the map image API, because that's a REST API and I've got that queued up here, which is literally an API that gives you a map image. I'm firing this off and you can see it is a picture of a map. So this literally turns a JPEG or a PNG of a map at this particular location, at this particular zoom level, with this particular size. This is super great for things like, hey, you're building an Alexa skill, and you have one of those Alexas with a screen, and you just want to show it, or you want to show a skill card on the user's phone to display just an image there. Or imagine you have a ride-sharing, ride-hailing business, and you want to show people the route they drove in the emails that you send them with the bill, so they can associate the bill with a particular ride. That's what this is for. But let's go to the web SDK. And a great way to start with both the JavaScript web SDK and the Android SDK is to go to our GitHub, github.com/heremaps. And if you type in, for example, JavaScript or Android SDK or something, you'll get these really nice collections of examples. And in fact, let's just go real quick, copy this, and say, let's clone this here. And then we can open up Visual Studio Code, and we can say open folder, those examples, and let's pick something that makes sense, a simple map, interactive base map. That sounds good. Let's open up this folder. And if we look at the JavaScript, that would, we're already half an hour in, so I can't really go into too much detail on how to set this up. In fact, this is something that Shruti will be doing half an hour from now. So if you're interested in how this works, you can do this in more detail, but I just want to show it to you in action. So we can go again here, web, JavaScript examples, interactive base map, and we'll just open up the demo in a browser. And you'll see it's a very simple way to integrate a map into your applications. You'll see it's got really nice, smoothly scrolling vector maps, and it goes into 3D, and you can start rotating the map and moving the camera, doing this just using the standard interactivity here, but you can do this with code as well. So you get these really nice 3D web maps. Another thing you can do is to go and try these maps on a mobile device. So same thing really applies. You can go to, if you want to go get started quickly, you can go to our GitHub and you can say, let's say Android. And you have to be careful. We still need to rename this. This is for the old version. What you're looking for is the one that says 4.x. So here SDK examples. And again, you can just go and clone this. In the meantime, we can fire up Android Studio. And say open an existing Android project. And go into code, Android. So we've got here SDK examples. Now there's different editions. If you really want to get started with the SDKs, I would recommend you use the Explore edition. Let's go into Android, and then let's open up a simple Hello Map example. While Gradle runs, there's two things we need to do. One is we need to take the SDK file, the AAR file, and put that into the libs folder. Where do you get that? Well, you get that for some reason I'm not logged in anymore. Let's log in. You get that in your account settings. When you've created credentials for the Android SDK, you get these little download links. So you would download this, that'll give you a zip file which contains the AAR file. So this is where I got that. So you put that under, no, we want to put that under where we are, examples, Explore, Android, Hello Map, app, libs. Here it needs to go. And then we'll see, I think we can probably do without this update for now. And then if you go into your main activity, you'll see we have some simple setup code, load a map scene here. And in your Android manifest, you'll see there is, no, sorry, not in the Android manifest, in the layout, activity main, you'll see there's a map view. This is just a standard Android view that shows a map. What I think we still need to do is go into the Android manifest and add our credentials. This is the other thing you need to do. And I've got the credentials right here. So I think we need the here access key. And don't worry that you can see this. It's the same thing as with the other thing. You can just delete keys and rotate them, which is what I'll do afterwards. So you can't steal this. And even if you could, it's just a freemium account, which you can just get on your own. No questions asked. So there's really no point in stealing these credentials. So I'll run a quick Gradle build, and then we'll see how this works in an emulator. In the meantime, we can look at my wonderful Dimetrodon desktop background, which is much nicer than to stare at than Gradle. Okay, Gradle build finished. Let's fire up the emulator. These error messages are just your regular reminder that I think AMD graphics drivers suck. You can ignore those. This shouldn't cause us any problems. Takes a little while, of course, for this to fire up. I can't show you my actual phone here in the webinar platform. So I'll have to make do with the emulator, but we'll actually see that even in the emulator, this looks nice and performs pretty well. I'm going to take a sip of my morning coffee because it is 8:30 in the morning in Berlin. It's much later, probably where most of you are. But this, for me, this is starting off my my work week. It's going to take a little while because I had cleverly shut down the emulator before. I'm going to close some of those windows and go ahead and scroll to the last interesting section, which is fleet telematics, which we'll look at in a minute. In fact, I'm going to open up something else that's going to be useful for you to look at some things that can be done with the APIs and some of those advanced features. Pixel is still starting. Here we go. Installation did not succeed due to device offline. Feels like it took too long for that to start, so we'll do it again. Ah, damn, I hit the build button, which is not what I wanted to do. That's okay. Give it another second. Start it, and then hopefully it'll get installed on the emulator. There we go. And there you are. And you can, in fact, see there's a map, kind of what we saw on the web, and you can see too here. It's all very nice, very good looking vector maps, and you can turn them and scroll them. And if I remember correctly how to do 2-finger mouse gestures with the emulator, you can see you can again tilt the camera and you get these nice 3D buildings and everything. So really cool, very smooth looking, well-performing map in your Android application, just as a standard Android view. And I did those last two things to give you an idea of how the maps look like, but also how easy it is to have your first map up and running. If your application basically requires a map as a basis, either on the web or on Android, your best bet to get started and have a map showing is really to go to GitHub and get the examples downloaded, both for Android, works similar for iOS, and for JavaScript and the web, and you'll literally, as you can see, be up and running with your first map in a couple of minutes. And all those APIs I've showed you, search, geocoding, routing, and so on, these are also all available through the JavaScript SDK, through the Android SDK, through the iOS SDK. So you don't have to call the REST APIs on your Android devices, but the parameters and the capabilities are all the same. So let's look as a last thing. I think I've got about 3 minutes left before Sam is going to stop me from talking. So I'll just give you a very quick overview of the fleet telematics section. This is really all about routing and all about logistics and delivery. So I talked about, for example, truck routing. Really think about it. When you're driving a big truck, that is a very different thing than driving a car. Do not use car navigation to drive a truck. Why? Because the truck has a certain width, a certain height, a certain weight. A truck might actually have something dangerous in the back, something that's explosive or harmful to water. So a route that a truck can actually drive without crashing into a bridge that's too low, without going over something it's too heavy for, without turns in it that it can't actually take, without driving near a water source it's not legally allowed to drive. All those things are really quite different than car navigation. So one of the things the Fleet API gives you is track routing. It also gives you toll cost routing. So you can figure out how expensive a certain road is for your particular vehicle and what kind of things you need to do. The truck routing API also has things like legal driver rest times. A super powerful thing in the API is the waypoint sorting. So I alluded to this earlier. Imagine you have deliveries to make. And you want to know what the best order to make those deliveries in is. And you might have lots of constraints. You might have an 8-hour workday, and each delivery might take 20 minutes. And certain deliveries need to be done before other deliveries or before a certain time, or certain deliveries need to be done during the opening hour of a certain loading dock or store. So you can put all of those constraints into the waypoint sorting API, and it'll actually give you an optimized order in which to deliver these. For those with a CS degree, this is basically a traveling salesman. So this is a heuristic, not a truly optimized version, but it's a really cool API that actually does this for you. There are many other things in here. There's even electric vehicle charging. This is also something we'll talk about in the routing API later. There's a special feature for electric vehicle routing, which kind of combines the routing API and the characteristics of the electric vehicle with data from the Places API with the electric vehicle charging stations, and so on. There's also features like geofencing. So for example, if you want to get alerted when an asset leaves your factory grounds, you can use geofencing. Or if you want to ensure that a security truck stays on a specific preset route and you want to get an alert when they leave that route, you can do geofencing. So there's a lot of powerful stuff in here. My 45 minutes are already over. So I'll just very quickly go over this again and say, kind of sum up what we can do for you. Anything around maps. You've seen this, everything from a simple map image to a very cool 3D map on mobile devices, we can do for you. Geocoding and search. Anything involving addresses, points of interest, searching for them, converting them, we can do that for you. Really anything around mobility. You want to route by bike, you want to combine multiple modes of transit, you want to know how the traffic is, you want to know which trains are late. All that information available in our routing and mobility APIs. Then really anything around delivery and logistics, routing for big vehicles, logistics and delivery optimization, geofencing. This is the waypoint sequence API I talked about, toll costs. I would love to go into the advanced data sets, which has some really cool information, but we don't have time for that. Maybe if there's no other questions, somebody can ask a question about this and I can go into this for a second. So all kinds of additional stuff. Some of the stuff you'll see here isn't available in freemium. So make sure if you go, particularly if you go below kind of this level, make sure that if you find something that's interesting to you, that it's actually available through your freemium plan. But all of the things I talked about right now are available in your freemium plan. You can use for free right now in your hackathon projects. Just go to a kind of cool example for some other things that I haven't had a chance to talk about yet. This is nice, Isoline routing. So this is a specific feature of the routing API that allows you to say, let's hit search here. Does that work? Sure why it works. Oh, because I've set no distances, it can't possibly work. So this is basically a feature of the routing API that shows you the area you can reach with a certain amount of driving. So you can see I've set this to 224 kilometers, 115 kilometers, and 71 kilometers. And this is with that amount of driving distance, the area you can reach. A more interesting version of this is by time, where you basically say, and again, imagine some sort of ride-hailing use case where you want to know as a driver which customers are available that I can pick up in 10 minutes of driving. Because if they wait longer than 10 minutes, they'll get angry. Similar for logistics use cases, and this is with live traffic. So imagine you're a food delivery service. You could actually dynamically adapt your delivery range based on current traffic situations and deliver to more people in low traffic situations than you could in other situations. So that's a really neat feature. I mentioned the advanced data sets API. You can get some really cool stuff out of our map data. So for example, this demo shows you the slope of the road for each individual road segment. You can basically see how much it goes up and down along the entire route. That's actually useful information in things like electric vehicle use cases, where going down recharges your battery and going up really strains it. And in fact, this is information that's used in our EV routing. You can get the same thing for, I think, things like speed limits. Let me search for this. Speed limits along a route, for example. So you can go and calculate a route here, and something's wrong with my internet, it's very slow. And it'll actually show you the speed limit for every segment of the road. This is not the best example in the world because this is an Autobahn and there is no speed limit restriction. But let's go down. Let's see if we can actually find a place. Here we go. So this is where the road turns more curvy and you end up being in this is where you leave the Autobahn and you go into the inner city, and then you can see it's 50 kilometers. Might even get slower in some spots. There's 30 here. So just as a further idea of the kind of data and the kind of features that you can get from our APIs if you dig a little into them.